All right, so we're in lesson 6 in the absence of truth this evening. As has been the case with all of them so far, they roll pretty closely into each other, so there's going to be a lot of overlap. But before we jump in, I'm going to warn you, one, I'm going to ask I think only one of the discussion questions that was actually in the lesson. I've pulled out a lot of things that I'm going to be talking about from the lesson, but a lot of this I want it to be a discussion that we're having about what we've seen in our lives in the world around us, because I think this lesson especially is kind of the culmination of the previous 3. So we've already talked really about truth. We've talked about it a lot in different scenarios. And so I think now it'd be best for us to use this time to try to make it more personal to us. How does this affect us in our daily lives and our walk as Christians? So in the absence of truth, first thing I want to ask is just who or what defines morality? Take that however you wish. All right, we'll start with Kyle.
Whoever is in charge.
Whoever is in charge, okay? Yeah.
Well, I was going to say God.
I think that falls under what Kyle said, right? Who's in charge? Yeah. The thing that I like about who's in charge that Kyle said is it leaves that up to the interpretation of the person, which is definitely how most people are going to approach this in the world. Bob, did I see your hand as well?
Well, Kyle basically said what I'm saying, but people are in the position to exert power to get their ways to happen is really what it is. And it might be the power of the gun in certain situations.
I can't remember now if the lesson specifically said that or not. It definitely alluded to it, but it used a phrase that I've heard many times before of might makes right, right? And so if I'm the strongest, the baddest, and you can't, by strength of will or physical strength, stop me or enforce your will, well, then I'm going to control what the outcome is, right? Any other thoughts? Who or what determines what morality is? We definitely haven't touched all of the things that you will hear. We've hit probably, I would say, 2/3 of the major ones.
I think most people would say the society in which you live determines morality.
Yeah, so there's one is God, one is strength, and the third that I was thinking of was the consensus of a group, right? Which would be the society that Rita's talking about. That not necessarily it's because I, David, am the strongest person and therefore what I say goes. But rather we, as people, all understand we are at equal or disadvantaged levels of power with each other, and we don't want our opinions to be completely overthrown by the people around us if they get stronger than me at some point. So we set up some kind of system or a constitution, let's say, of where we agree to a set of principles, and then that's what defines morality for us.
We're alive in an unusual time. There's another one I really wasn't going to bring up, but I think it's important to talk about, is the media has inserted itself collectively, literally or collusionally, to promote moralities and so on and so forth, like the trans, homosexual, pick those kind of things. So we've not seen that historically in the past, but we're living it today.
Yeah, the media is a not wholly new concept in the modern era, but the way in which it can exert control or at least influence very easily is definitely different than I think any other.
The media has been weaponized.
Yeah. So the closest thing I can think to that is actually more like the Middle Ages with the Catholic Church, right? Where we have some organization that is not the government, although it kind of was, that exerts its will over a group of people or all of society or something, right? And they use a lot of the same tactics too. If you want to dive into history and kind of look and compare the two.
And so in reality, that's a discussion
it's funny, it's really not about morality, it's about power. And power is ultimately the root that allows them to exert their definition of morality. And I was thinking here when you started talking about this, about Isaiah, I went back and found it, Isaiah 5:20. Because in Isaiah's time, he was making this point to Israel, that, you know what, the morality of this nation has drifted to the place now that you have people who call evil good and good evil.
Yeah.
You know, that they have totally flipped the way God defined it. Now you define it exactly the opposite way God defined it.
Yeah, that's a really good callback to the Old Testament. Again, kind of reiterating the fact that, yes, this might look different now, but it's not new, right? This has always been around. It's just taking a different shape than maybe
It's just a new nation doing it.
Yeah, exactly, that too. I mean, in fact, and the book kind of alluded to this, but there's a lot of parallels between our modern society and the Roman society, and therefore most of the issues we have now are also the issues they had then. So if you ever want to do a study where you're kind of trying to use the past to predict the future, go back and study the Roman Empire and follow how it progressed and what's happening there, both politically and spiritually. And you'll start to see flag after flag of, that's sounding really, really familiar. Any other thoughts on this before we continue? So I pulled a few different quotes that were in the book by various people. I've listed who they were, but I'm not going to say it as I read them. I want to just go through these quickly. So one of the quotes that we hear about morality is, "We choose beliefs the way we choose an entree at a restaurant, whatever juicy morsel pleases our palates. This not only puts the self at the center of the choice of any activity, thereby erecting a new overarching worldview with the self-claimed God, but also puts great pressure on those who are trying to persuade others to adopt their beliefs." And I think, if I remember correctly, it was Maggie that pulled this out 2 lessons ago when we were talking about truth, that it really, really comes down to a self-focus, a selfish nature most of the time. Morality is whatever the powerful define it to be, and saying similar things to that. Everything is moral that is necessary for the annihilation of the old exploiting social order and for uniting the proletariat. That one, maybe not all the specific words are appropriate for our situation today, but the concept absolutely is. Whatever is necessary, well, that's what I will define morality as. It's completely situation ethics, except with a power twist on it. Moral standards are whatever the elite define them to be. That's kind of the summary. And even in our consensus society, is the way I will describe it, this still usually ends up holding true. At times it does not, but most of the time you get down to it, the individuals in power still are the ones who will set the definitions and therefore what society sees morality as. There is an arbitrary, selective enforcement of these moral values, and I put a note there to see the tolerance lesson. Last week's, when we were talking about Middle Eastern religions, this was a big thing. Actually, went on the last question of that lesson was, how are secularists and Muslims alike in reference to tolerance? And immediately the first thing that jumped to my mind was how they twist, how things get twisted. That's one of the ways that it's similar. So they both are thinking that someone who holds an opposing view is of lesser position than them, right? Because of that, they then get to define what that means, what comes because of that. So we get into these situations where tolerance means that I have to tolerate you and you have to tolerate me, except that I have power, and so when it actually comes back to me, it doesn't actually reciprocate there, right? Yeah. So I, David, had to tolerate you, but you did not actually have to tolerate me when it came back around to, what would be your turn to tolerate something you didn't agree with.
David, you made the statement, not those words, but there's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah.
What we're looking at to a large degree, if we want to put a label on it, is humanism.
Yes.
That's really what it is. And we've seen that throughout the Bible. As we read the Bible, there's humanism that crops up. There's humanism hugely in the quote-unquote religious world that we see really everywhere. And this is another slice of it.
Yes. This is one of the ways that you can get to any of the other enticing sins that you want to make okay. If you can eliminate a universal truth, well, everything else is gravy then. It's really easy to get whatever you want out of the result. So while this isn't always the first step, it's often one of the final. That once we've passed this stage, anything's game. And I don't have to redefine society anymore. I've done that already. Now I just get to play in my playground that I created to the destruction of everyone in it, which is the part that most people in the situation, sometimes even Christians, but definitely people who think God isn't real, get into the trap of thinking, well, this is an open playground with no restrictions, so I can define morality for myself, and whatever that is, it will be mine, and no one can tell me otherwise. But that's not what actually ends up happening, right? Someone will define it and will enforce it. So it's just a fallacy to think that this quote-unquote freedom to choose what truth is gets me anything as an individual. Higher up? I did turn it on. No, I didn't. Test, test, test. Is it coming through? Okay. Thank you, Corey. Sorry. Yes.
The thing all the things that you're saying, the cake situation, always that comes to mind because you see that side being totally intolerant of somebody else's ideas and beliefs, and they're forcing their values, their beliefs on a cake mix. And to the point that they put that person out of business.
Yes. Freedom isn't freedom. For me to have freedom, I have to take something from you in a lot of those situations. And so, in that example, the freedom that was realized by the LGBTQ community ended up taking a freedom from someone else to make a choice to not or choose not to bake a cake, which it's a great example because of how ridiculous it is. It's really hard to get seriously locked in this scenario because we're talking about baking a cake. It's not something that is life or death. It's much more simple than that. Other thoughts on some of these quotes that I've pulled out? I know I've been talking a lot, and I can continue to do that, but I would, like I said, I want this to be a discussion.
The interesting part about that is, about those in power, is the selective enforcement. I think that's always interesting, that some things are considered immoral and are, if you will, are persecuted or prosecuted, and other things that are actually similar, of a similar kind, are ignored or even celebrated. So that the fact that there's not a consistent foundation on the enforcement of the morality, which is exactly why you need power, right?
Right.
But when you have laws, you don't need power. But when you want to be the law, then you have that power.
Yeah, I won't go there. Yeah, very good point. Other thoughts? So, in a world that is absent of a universal truth, is it better? It was one of the sections of the lesson, but I think it's better posed as a question. Hopefully you've read the research already that Mike pulled out about this. If you want to quote some of that, great, or from your own life experience. Is this world where universal truth is not universally accepted, is that better?
We believe, if you ask most people who advocate for it, they believe that it's better, at least it's better in idea, or in concept, it might be better. Now, the reality of the execution is a different thing.
I think I know what you mean, but can you expound a little?
Sure. We wouldn't have a lot of the modern problems that we've got now, that we're talking about here in these lessons, if somebody didn't say, oh, I think this is better. You know, somebody thought it was better, and therefore it should be advanced. It should be, if it's something that we need to make to come to fruition. So we need to influence people to make this the law of the land, or to make this the practice of the society. You know, all of them that ultimately are making, I mean, factually making us worse, all of them seemed like they would make us better. They would fix one of the flaws of our society. You know, somebody believed that. We wouldn't have gotten where we are.
Yeah, and similar to that made me think of, we'll touch more on this later, but I want to pull in Acts 17, verse 21. This is where Paul is in Athens. And one of the things that that Luke, the writer of Acts, is commenting on the people of Athens was that they always wanted to hear something new, right? And that, I mean, instantly when Mark started talking, it made me think of that. And I mean, my comment or note for myself was, does that sound familiar? Yes. You know, it's almost always what we see, whether it's secularly or oftentimes religiously as well, that I have some new way of interpreting this that is better just because it's new, right? Yes. Gene, did you have your hand up?
You know, I'm sitting here and what I'm hearing, basically nothing's changed. I mean, when I was, you know, a teenager and growing up, I can't think of anything that basically we're doing today that wasn't done then. So what's the difference?
Has a new face.
Hmm?
So a lot of times it just has a new face, an outer skin or a veil that has changed it. You're right. The concepts are absolutely the same.
A lot of it is that people today are more well, I'm thinking about, for example, a young girl got pregnant when I was growing up. It was a private thing. In other words, it wasn't, they didn't go around showing it.
There was a different societal standard, right? It still happened, but society looked at it different. Is that what you're getting at?
Well, a lot of the stuff, a lot of the things that went on, people didn't just get out and throw it in your face.
Right.
Like,
But they didn't do that because society wouldn't have accepted it then, but they do now. Right?
Right now I'm thinking about Israel and how very rarely did they really follow God's law. They wanted to do what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
And that was idolatry, Baal worship, and all the sexuality that went around what was going on with that. And today, this seems really like the same thing. This way, society, there's nothing wrong. I don't have anybody judging me, telling me what to do. I can decide what's right, and therefore, I can do what I want to do. And it just feels like this, the same thing Israel was doing back when.
Yeah.
And then if you look at the religious world, even those that purport there is a God, they still do what they want to do, not what God says to do. So you've got society, you've got the religious world, but basically man wants to do what he wants to do unless he's willing to become that living sacrifice and to live according to God's word.
Yeah, you've still got people who do want to follow God. You've got people who outwardly look like they want to follow God but are making up their own rules. And then the people who don't care and just throw it, I mean, even visually, outwardly, are throwing it aside. There's still only one of those groups that's doing what's right and following God, right? Yeah, Bob?
But Gene's question was what's different, and of course your point is the standard is different. Absolutely right. One of the things that's very, very different, we often don't think about, we take it for granted. We've all got computers in our pockets, and we're all inundated with information day in, day out, depending on how much we pay attention to it. And all those things Gene's talking about, those are all put in our face if we choose to allow them to be. And so we are pressured, we as individuals are all pressured by that to change our hearts and our minds and so on to go away from God. Technology is used by the devil, there's no question in my mind. And I think that's a big difference today.
I think it makes a lot of sense to have responsible technology teaching or classes for basically everyone in the modern age, because it's so easy to fall into that trap. Kyle?
So, two things. Technology lets us do what we were going to do already faster.
Yep.
Right? Every society, regardless of their technology, without God, has gone the same direction. We're just going faster because we have the ability to do that.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is, the difference between now and when, let's say, Gene was a teenager, was the percentage of people that held that God was God and his word was truth and he was the standard of morality. Yeah, there was always the things going on then that go on today, but the percentage of people who hold God as a source of morality is far less than it used to be. And our culture and our world is reflecting that.
Yeah, the lesson I think goes into that quite a bit when it's talking, when it's quoting what was the book called? The Index of Leading Cultural Indicators American Society at the End of the 20th Century. It's a long title. But there was a lot of statistics in there that I think back up what we're talking about there. Mark and then Gene.
I was going to say what Kyle said, that we had the behaviors back 50 years ago that we have now. The difference is the percentages. The percentage of people who live together outside of marriage, there were some, they weren't nearly at the percentage that we have today. There were people who were gay or lesbian back then. The percentage of people now is much higher. The public, if you will, the public shame or humiliation that went with it 50 years ago is gone now. So it's the same old behaviors. The percentages of the people involved in them have greatly increased.
Yeah, I agree. That's absolutely true. Gene?
With what Kyle was saying, and really what Mark's saying, the denominational world was not what it is today. I mean, and the denominational world, let's face it, there's more Baptists, Methodists, Presbyterians, and this and that, you know. So what happens, it seems to me like that, in other words, the denominational is away from the Bible. And further away you get away from the teaching, the truth that you don't want to talk about tonight, these things happen. They happen. And the only thing can, let's face it, the only thing can stop it. No, the only thing that tells me that I can't go out and do things, you know, have a woman over the house, or whatever I want to do, is that I'm concerned about this and I understand this.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I remember even back in high school having debates with people who were, there was, I don't remember what the club was called, but some kind of Christian club at school that most of my friends who were in it, I believe, were Baptist at the time. And I remember having debates with them about where did morality come from.
And the thing that's happened, one of the things that's happened to the church, if you just watch 15, 20 years before or after the denominational world, people start doing this, you see the church is done.
Yeah, that does happen.
In other words, the only thing you have to do is look at people going to church. I mean, when I was growing up, you didn't go to church with shorts.
Okay.
So as you further away you are from this, then you're going to be having these problems and having a feeling that what's going on today. And it's bad.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely bad. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think, like, for me, the thing that comes to my mind is, we're talking about a collective truth, and that question specifically, is it better? It's like collective truth, in my mind, would become like, okay, this is similar to a standard. Okay?
The standard, yeah.
We don't have a collective truth or a standard, and we have no common ground, we have no set point that we can all agree on, and then work. So then if you take that a little bit further and say, okay, well, if we don't all have common ground, we don't all have a standard that we're holding each other to or we're trying to work from, then we're gonna have division. So then you look at that historically and say, okay, well, whether it's the Industrial Revolution or world wars that were fought, or religious movements, or any of these big things that have happened over history that we'll say, you know, all of them specifically we won't get into, you know, did it make the world a better place or not, but all these big changes that advance society or how we, you know, take care of people or whatever, that really stemmed from a community or a group of people that came together with a common standard or a common goal that they were working together on off the same basis. So in my mind, you know, the answer would probably be no. Is it gonna be better? No. There's more division, there's more people, you know, we've talked about, I think here before, like with technology specifically, we're more connected than we've ever been with people, but we're somehow more disconnected.
Yes,
from
yeah.
people. Like to Gene's point about, you know, different religions and all these different groups splitting up and doing their own thing. It's like there's a club for everything, a group for everything. But we're not working towards the same thing, which is love your neighbor and follow the things that are in this book. And we're all just doing our own things for our own reasons and not going to be able to come together and really make any progress.
Yeah. Very good point. Yeah, Rita?
When we think about, sorry, when we think about this as far as denominations, and that's one of the things I was thinking about when I was reading this lesson, that we see this in religion since, you know, since the beginning. I mean, since men started corrupting the truth, you know,
Yeah.
in the first century. But, you know, I was thinking about some of Kyle's sermon on Sunday, and some of the things that we've heard and we've read that, you know, men who portray themselves to be ministers of the gospel, and they make statements like it doesn't matter what you believe. Well, think about that. It doesn't matter what you believe. Is that not synonymous with there is no truth? And
My question is always when someone says that, then why are you talking to me?
Right.
Right?
Right.
If your, whatever you are trying to preach to me is correct in your mind, but it doesn't matter, because everybody's going to be fine. Why are you wasting your breath? Leave me alone. Right? It doesn't, it just logically doesn't make any
When
sense.
you take a group of people, I think as we are today, and especially our younger generation today, what they've been influenced with, I mean, this has been ground into them that there really isn't one truth.
Mhm.
Your truth isn't my truth. It's obviously going to carry over to everything, including the church.
Oh, yeah.
And so we have a group of people who I think are extremely vulnerable to what some of these men are pushing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Gene?
I'm gonna say this and we'll shut up. Several years ago, in other words, I volunteered with CASA
Mhm.
about 15 years.
Yeah.
In Evansville. I mean, I had a lot of boys. And I had a boy that's in trouble at school. So, had a meeting at school, the principal and whatnot. And the problem was, at that time, the kids had their cell phone and this or that. And I'm sitting there like, man, here's a principal of a school, and he can't figure this out. So I asked him, I said, why do they have their cell phone? Do they need a cell phone here? Okay, have you heard the news lately? On the news now, they're putting in, some places are putting in laws and whatnot at school. They can have a cell phone, they're going to give
Oh, yeah.
a place to put it, this or that.
Mhm.
It took a long time to figure that out.
Yeah, you're right. It really did,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
It's nice as human nature, we need boundaries. Children, you know, every guy at the firehouse that has a kid, oh, you've got kids stroller, what's your advice? Treat them like a puppy. If you crate train them, it's better for them, it's better for you, they have a schedule, they know they're safe, they know they're, you know, like, they need those boundaries, they seek those boundaries out, right? We are all that way, and, you know, kids will have their fun, they will do the things that they're going to do, it doesn't matter if they're, you know, 10, 12, 18, 42, when it boils down to, when it is time to meet your maker, when things get serious, human nature is we look for something that's solid and we look
Yes.
for a foundation. And that is what, and not growing up in the church, and growing up where society does have a lot of sway in what's talked about and what's not talked about, what's fun and what's done and, you know, all of those things. The one thing that, you know, I held to that Amanda kept bringing back to was the scripture. Was the foundation, was that this rock never moves.
Yes.
So what's so nice as a Christian that no matter what you throw in my face, like I have a rock that doesn't move, and I can tell you what that is. Whether or not you want to hear it, that's fine. I know my job is I have to tell you.
Yeah.
I don't know what your soil is like. So as bad as things get, the brighter our light becomes if we worry about ourselves. If we worry about what am I doing? How am I allowing it to affect my household? What happens behind the door of my house when it closes? That's what's important. And so, even in an absence of truth, it doesn't matter what's going on in this world because we're not of this world.
Right.
And having this firm foundation is just, it's just so nice. I can sleep like a baby at night.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Mark?
One of the points that, and Mike doesn't go into the lessons on his purpose yet, that I think we can appeal to people is everybody has an innate sense of something that is right or wrong. We all have that. I mean, we all have some idea of, sometimes you might call it fair play, turnabout. You know, we all have a sense that what you did was wrong, or you know, you owe me something. You know, all of those are expressions that there is something that I know is right, and I'm on you because I don't believe you're doing it. You know, and it also goes to therefore that we all fail at doing it, right?
Yes.
We know it's right, and then we have excuses for why we don't do it. So that innate sense of something in us that is, we know that is right or wrong, is a reminder that we are a created being. That is innate to us, that we know. It doesn't come from our society. It doesn't come from a teaching. It's built in. It's wired into us. And it's evidence that we are a created being. And if we're a created being, then therefore there must be a creator that made us.
Well, see, now you've gone too far. Too many steps down that path.
But
yeah.
you have to start there sometimes with people to get them to see it's not unreasonable to say there is a God. It's not unreasonable to say that he reigns and he has the right to command his creation, because we have evidence within us that we are created.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to skip forward because that ties pretty closely into what I wanted to go over towards the end. So we'll come back. Oh, come on. We'll come back if we have time. Go ahead and turn to, Acts 17, I think. Yeah, Acts 17. Current slide. There we go. Okay, so Acts 17. I'm going to read a somewhat lengthy passage, but I think it will be worth it. I need to get there now. All right, so we're going to start in verse 16. I alluded to this earlier, but we're going to read 16 through the end of the chapter. So it says, "While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, his spirit was troubled within him when he saw that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and with those who worshiped God, and in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Then also some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers argued with him. Some said, 'What is this pseudo-intellectual trying to say?' Others replied, 'He seems to be a preacher of foreign deities, because he's telling them the good news about Jesus and the resurrection.' They took him and brought him to the Areopagus and said, 'May we learn about this new teaching you're speaking of? For what you say sounds strange to us, and we want to know what these ideas mean.' Now all the Athenians and the foreign residents there spent their time on nothing else but telling or hearing something new. Then Paul stood in the midst of the Areopagus and said, 'Men of Athens, I see that you are extremely religious in every aspect. For as I was passing through and observing the objects of your worship, I even found an altar on which was inscribed, quote, 'To an unknown God.' Therefore, what you worship in ignorance, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, he is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in shrines made by hands. Neither is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives everyone life and breath and all things. From one man he was made every nationality to live over, or has made every nationality to live over the whole earth, and has determined their appointed times and the boundaries of where they live. He did this so that they might seek God, and perhaps they might reach out and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and exist, as even some of our own poets have said, for we are also his offspring. Being God's offspring, then, we shouldn't think that the divine nature is like a gold or silver or stone, an image fashioned by human art and imagination. Therefore, having overlooked the times of ignorance, God now commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has set a day when he is going to judge the world in righteousness by the man he has appointed. He has provided proof of this, to everyone by raising him from the dead. When they heard about this resurrection of the dead, some began to ridicule him, but others said, 'We'd like to hear more from you again about this.' Then Paul left their presence. However, some men joined him and believed, including Dionysius the Areopagite, a woman named Damaris, and others with them." Okay, it was a long reading. I pulled out some specific lessons I could take away from this section that I think apply to this comment/question that I made up. Is with this study of tolerance and tolerance in different facets of society, and then the lack of universal truth, what does that mean for me? How do I actually conduct myself as a Christian when I'm encountering people that I disagree with, even if maybe I disagree with them so much or find their beliefs so horrible that I abhor it. It shocks me. I don't even know how to deal with the situation that they're in, right? And then there's many of these out in the world that we will all run into. I pulled out 5. There's probably 27 in this section. There's a ton. But what I wanted to say is, one, in verse 18, I find it really interesting that their initial response, the intellectuals of the day, was to quote, "What is this pseudo-intellectual trying to say?" That sounds familiar, right? We're often like, oh, they sound like they're talking philosophy, but they're idiots. It happened to Paul back then, right? In verse 21, they wanted to hear something new. Again, this should sound familiar. In verse 23, I want to pull out his first thing that he actually does here is he makes a connection to what they already knew, right? If what Mark was discussing, if we have to work them up to there is a creator, right? If I just drop that on someone who doesn't believe there is a creator, we're instantly just butting heads, and there's no way that they're going to listen to me any further. I have to start 7 stages before that to get them to the logical place where they can even accept that there is a creator, right? So that's something I took away from Paul here. In verse 31, on the other side of that, he doesn't shy away from the truth. In verse 31, he's talking about ultimate judgment. So yes, he started early where they were and worked them up to the truth. But then he didn't stop with just Jesus. He stopped with ultimate final judgment that everyone's going to have to deal with. So yes, he backed off at the beginning to ease them into it, but he did not actually shy away from the truth. He absolutely was firm on that. And in the same section, the same speech that he was giving, completed the mission, right? He had the start and the finish all in one go, which is something Kyle and I were talking about a few weeks ago with talking with people who don't believe, is that there's been a lot of research that's showing you kind of got to do it in one set, right? If you can not give them the entire Bible, but the beginning and the end, they got to get the whole picture at once to really see it. And then the last one I pulled out was in verse 32, that was similar to some of the comments we've had already. I'm not in charge of the result. We see here Paul, an apostle, someone who had physical, spiritual, holy gifts, something we don't have. Still, his results were, some listened, some thought he was crazy, some thought it was entertaining to talk with him, right? There were lots of different reactions, and that's not what I'm in charge of. So I wanted to end on that with these things in mind of how can we act this way, or how do we act, rather, when we're engaging with people who disagree with us and maybe disagree very significantly, that we've got to be like Paul and like all the other apostles. This is just one of many, many examples that we can go through about how to conduct ourselves. Thank you very much. I think it was a great class. Next week will be lesson number 7.